Um, how about we get started? Good afternoon, everyone. I am Chandler Touchstone. I am the Community Outreach Chair of APLE, and thank you for attending this event. We were hoping to, get Rutgers students, acclimated and introduced with possible partners for the summer MEDA partnership program, but also just to get to know, different public interest groups that are available to them should they want to go into public interest after graduation or for any kind of internship or externship in law school. So we've invited to eight panelists to two different panels, and we hope that you attend the evening one as well. I would like to introduce this morning's panelists from the Pennsylvania Innocence Project. We have Neelam Sanghvi. For Partners for Women in Justice, we have Michelle Lefkowitz. For ACLU New Jersey, we have Jean I'm bad with Italian names, Lo Cicero.
It's Lo Cicero.
Lo Cicero, I apologize so much, but Jean Lo Cicero. And then for South Jersey Legal Services, we have John Pendergast. Thank you all for attending. For our first question, could you briefly introduce yourselves and your organizations? Starting with, we'll start with the Pennsylvania Innocence Project, followed by Partners for Women in Justice, the ACLU, and then South Jersey Legal Services.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Neelam Sanghvi. I'm the legal director at the Pennsylvania Innocence Project. Our name is somewhat self-explanatory, but we're a nonprofit. We've been open for a little over 10 years now, and we mainly work to free people who are incarcerated in Pennsylvania prisons for crimes that they did not commit. We also do a lot of policy and training work to try to loosen up post-conviction laws to make it easier to challenge your conviction if you're innocent, and also to try to train people to investigate and try cases so that hopefully innocent people are not convicted in the first place. It's nice to be with all of you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Lefkowitz from Partners for Women in Justice, and I'm the Director of Legal Programs. And our name is not self-explanatory, so I'll go ahead and explain it. We represent victims of domestic violence in family court proceedings, so not the criminal side, but the protection side. We do mostly final restraining order hearings, but we also do custody, child support visitation for victims of domestic violence, either as a post-restraining order issue or even separately on the FD docket, which is the non-dissolution parenting docket. We also represent victims of sexual assault and protective order actions, and our organization does a fair bit of advocacy and policy work as well. And we strive to provide direct legal representation, excellent representation for our clients in 5 of the northern counties, and at the same time leverage our expertise in that area to affect systemic change that benefits victims of domestic violence across the state.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jean Lo Cicero. I'm the legal director at the American Civil Liberties Union of New Jersey. We are the state affiliate of the National ACLU, and we work generally on protecting and expanding civil rights and civil liberties across the state. We work in various ways, including public education, policy work, and litigation. I'm the legal director, so I'm responsible for the litigation, and we do impact work. So we are looking for cases that are going to advance the law or protect, clawbacks on civil rights and civil liberties. We work on a wide range of issues. Among our priorities are criminal justice reform, immigrants' rights. Lately, we've been involved with election and voting rights, marijuana legalization. That's been a big part of our office's work for the last 10 years. Immigrants' rights, reproductive health, So a real wide range of issues affecting folks across the state.
And hi, my name is John Pendergast. I'm the managing attorney of the Camden office of South Jersey Legal Services. Legal Services provides a variety of non-criminal civil assistance to clients. So we help indigent clients in areas like landlord-tenant law, foreclosures, benefits work such as Medicaid or food stamps. We also represent clients who need restraining orders. And we're expanding our case acceptance back into general family now too. So also divorces, child custody, child support. We help people with Medicaid benefits, Social Security, SSI specifically, and unemployment, which has been a more hot button issue lately. And I can never, like an expansive list would be, I can never do it very thoroughly. The last thing I will mention that comes to mind is we also have a low income taxpayer clinic. I tell people we're like a jack of all trades of basically poverty law on the civil side for clients. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Same order, if we could. So do you all consider your organizations to be larger or smaller? It's subjectively speaking, of course. And do you, what impact do you think that size has on your kind of work?
So I would say we're on the smaller side. We only have 10 employees and only 3 of us are full-time lawyers. We cover the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which is 67 counties that we could potentially find ourselves litigating in. That said, when I started back in 2013, I was the only person doing casework full-time, so we have been growing. We're lucky in that we can be affiliated with the Innocence Network, which is a nationwide sort of loose umbrella organization, so we can draw on expertise from what other nonprofits are doing in this area. And I think we've been lucky to really be able to leverage our impact beyond our size. Thus far, we've had 19 exonerations since we started, which is very high compared to most organizations. And we do a lot of amicus work in court and policy work that I'm hoping, affects systemic change beyond just the individual cases that we're able to manage. But obviously it's a challenge trying to figure out how many cases you can take on and do effective representation in when you're dealing with a, small staff and a limited budget.
Hi, I also consider Partners a small organization. We have about 15 employees. It's a mix of full and part-time, but we do have 4 practicing attorneys, plus 1 policy attorney who focuses on systemic issues. I think the great benefit of the size of our office and the size of our staff is that there's a lot of collaboration. It's really difficult to practice as an attorney in a vacuum, but it's also really difficult when there's an extremely large office and a lot of people involved. So I kind of feel like we're in that middle ground where we can collaborate, talk strategy, become involved in a lot of different cases because our cases arise and resolve so quickly. There's a lot of cases to talk about and can really benefit from everyone's input. And I think that's really a strength in our ability both to provide excellent direct services to our clients in court, in litigation, but also to inform our policy work as well.
So the ACLU, I still think we're small, but we're bigger than the other folks so far, which is to say that when I started, which was about 15 years ago, I came on as like the 8th or 9th employee, and now we're at about 25. When I joined, I was the 2nd attorney on staff, and now we have on our litigation side, 6 permanent attorneys and 2 law fellows and a law fellow on the policy team. So we're pretty significant, I think, for a public interest organization in New Jersey. But of course, a lot of us compare ourselves to the cities adjacent to where we are. And so like between New York and Philly, of course, they have other large providers. But like the other folks on the call, we also are trying to leverage our impact with amicus work and our policy. We have a policy team now, which is relatively new to the organization to think about statewide and systemic impact, ways to have systemic impact without the need to go and fight in court, and also be more creative in our solution, trying to find solutions to the problems New Jerseyans are facing. So yeah, so I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. For South Jersey Legal Services, we are kind of, I'm going to say the pandemic has made us more of a hybrid in that the office I manage right now has 13 employees. There are 8 attorneys and 5 paralegals. Although we're hiring 3 more attorneys soon, we are actually expanding right now because the need for our services is growing. But we cover the geographical southern half of the state. And so there are 7 other 8 offices total that cover the 9 counties in the southern half of the state. So we've always been very collaborative in the office. I think it's one of our greatest strengths because most of the attorneys we oppose are sole practitioners or they work in firms. And when I worked privately, at least the culture I encountered was a lot less collaborative because you want to make partner or you don't want to share the information or tips you may have. We are able to use arguments against one person in a firm and then a month later in court, the same thing against another person at that firm, that if they just talked, they could have possibly rebutted somehow, but they don't connect dots. It seems the way we do because we do collaborate, which is a really big strength. And since the pandemic hit, we have substantive area Zoom meetings for the whole organization, all 100 people now, every day except for Fridays. And so on Mondays, we talk about housing cases and consumer cases. Today, we talk about benefits. And Wednesday, we do family. And so we're sharing information very quickly across the organization as well. So the size is really useful sometimes, although it is kind of amusing sometimes to see how much things can vary as to how things happen in Cape May versus how they work in Camden. But I think our size, we used to feel very isolated by offices in that we didn't have great information sharing because we didn't even see each other that much. So that's been like a small silver lining to the pandemic for our work.
Thank you all so much for that. Our next question, what is your favorite part of working in public interest or at your respective organizations?
I think that's really hard to quantify for me, but I really, we have a very tangible sort of excitement when we are able to exonerate somebody and walk that person out of prison. And that makes all the very difficult days where we lose time and time again, very worthwhile. But for me, some of the most exciting stuff is being able to see the effect that the impact litigation and amicus work has to really. There's a case recently that deals with the doctrine where when I first started in 2013, we knew we needed to try to turn this around. And we've just been doing building blocks since then, case after case, amicus brief after amicus brief, when we finally got the doctrine wiped off the books. And it's that kind of thing that I think is really gratifying to see that big picture change.
So I actually, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You can go, Jean. I started my career in private practice, and I was in private practice for quite a number of years and found it incredibly unsatisfying. I felt like the work I was doing wasn't really making a difference for anyone, and it was just, and I was doing commercial litigation, so that's, definitely part of it. Just feel like money's passing between the large companies, and that's it. And so I started doing pro bono work, and I started doing more and more pro bono work as much as I was able to do. And eventually I realized that that was where my heart was. That's what I care about. And 8 years ago, I made this shift into public interest work. And my favorite thing about it is feeling like there is a purpose to my career. Everything I do is to benefit someone. And in domestic violence work, we are literally able to see people's lives change right before our eyes. We watch people walk out of court with protection, with the ability to start a fresh life, with having, empowered by having had their voice heard in court. And so it's really amazing. It's my favorite thing is litigating cases and getting to see the change that it brings to the clients.
I have a lot of the same feelings. I also was in private practice for a few years before coming to public interest. And I should say that I went to law school knowing I wanted to be a public interest lawyer, but also knowing that for my finances and other reasons, it was important for me to work in private practice for a little bit. And so, so coming back to public interest after that was really a relief in some ways, because you really can work on an issue, like you're working on behalf of clients, but you also get to really be strategic thinking and engaged in strategic thinking around an issue and how to kind of move the ball forward, as others have mentioned. And so like this was a big week for our organization, and my team helped voters be able to cast a ballot. We saw more than 2,000 people in New Jersey prisons released as a result of legislation we worked on with community partners, and the legalization of marijuana ballot amendment passed. And those are all efforts that just almost everyone in the office had their hands on at one time or another, and just to be part of that kind of systemic change where people's lives are going to be different, it can be really gratifying. And one thing I didn't mention before about like maximizing our impact is we couldn't do our work without our community partners. And in my time at the ACLU, our work has really shifted to really be in community with people, and that helps drive our agenda. And so we work in coalitions in the immigrants' rights space. We work with formerly incarcerated people on helping to prioritize our criminal justice work. We work in a very active coalition on reproductive health. So we're just trying to listen to communities in New Jersey about where the needs met. And so that's another way that it can be really gratifying to work in a coalition with people and kind of see where you want to be, and kind of every step of the way can be very gratifying.
I say my favorite part is a two-part answer. I think, like everyone else said, the initial favorite part is how much good we can do for our clients. I started out being a public defender. I've been an attorney for about 11 years. I was a public defender for 5 years, and then I went to private practice for 4 years or so to pay off my loans. And then I came back and started working in legal services. I very much like that we're like the first and last line of defense for the areas in which we practice, because you go to work or do your work each day knowing that but for you, most of these clients are not going to get the outcomes they may deserve. So I've never had a work day here where I stopped and wondered if I got anything useful, meaningful accomplished. Like I did in private practice, winning cases was very gratifying initially, but I had a friend who worked at a big law firm say once, I didn't know that making rich people richer was going to be this, was not going to be gratifying. He was saying it like tongue in cheek, and not to oversimplify, because he still worked there. He loves it. He's just like, yeah, I thought it would be more satisfying maybe. We don't have that problem when we work in public interest, I think. You're helping people preserve housing. If it's a landlord-tenant case who would probably otherwise be homeless, as was already mentioned, the DV case is obviously extremely important because there's a huge safety element to it, but also ties into that with housing, homelessness. That's probably one of the most important areas that we practice in too. The other thing I like a lot is that our program, the work we do, is calibrated to what our community needs. So we have to assess on an annual and biannual basis what our community needs help with. So if in theory landlords stop behaving the way they do tomorrow and everyone needed help with education law, we would slowly shift to that. We would train ourselves or hire different staff, et cetera. And a good example of that and how it can be satisfying is when the pandemic hit and tens of millions of people rendered unemployed, we suddenly had an explosion of unemployment cases. I like learning new things. And so we have people, luckily, who are already, subject matter experts who trained people up. And most of the staff has now had cases where someone comes to you who has no income, no way to work, perhaps because they have children at home or because they've been sick. And we are able to win them benefits. Like I had a case last week for an elderly woman who she had an old unemployment debt that we were able to get waived. And so now she can get $19,000 so she won't lose her house. That's a wonderful thing that a lot of lawyers who don't do public interest can't say they do ever, often, if ever. And that's something when you work in public interest, you can do a lot for people. So that's very, very rewarding.
Thank you all so much. So I think a lot of our students here are planning on, doing public interest work in the future or even this summer. So just to, I guess, prepare students for what to expect, what are some challenges or the hardest parts of working in public interest or your respective organizations?
Sorry about that. So I think, the hardest part is often resources. I'm pretty sure that most people, are going to have that same answer. Delivery, sorry. So, that's ultimately what it comes down to for us. There's always more cases we could be reviewing, more policy we could be trying to implement if we had more money and more staff. So I think that's the most challenging thing. I think another really challenging thing and something to be thinking about if you want to go into public interest as a career, and I think this is probably applicable to almost all public interest organizations, is the emotional exhaustion and burnout that can come. You're doing really important things for clients who are often in very difficult circumstances, and that can oftentimes start to weigh on you. When I was in private practice, I wasn't really staying up at night worrying about our clients that had allegedly dumped chemicals in a pit somewhere. I wanted to do a good job for them, but it wasn't something I brought home with me necessarily. But in this work, I think you do bring it home, and you really have to be mentally prepared to figure out ways to kind of cope with trying to balance and keep yourself from burning out.
So the issue of the emotional weight of the work really comes into play when you're working with victims of domestic violence. The stage we get involved is when people are seeking the protection. So under New Jersey law, that's usually immediately after the most recent incident of violence. So these are folks who are mid-crisis, and what they've experienced is sometimes really awful. And so when you work with victims of domestic violence, you hear about domestic violence all day, every day, and there is an emotional weight to that. But I think it's really important to counteract that. And there are ways that we do that. One of the ways we do it is by having such a collaborative and supportive office. We're all hearing about these things all day, and it can weigh on you, but then we talk about it with each other, and that can really help. It can really help. And it's also just, not to get back to the prior question, but, it really is all worthwhile when you see the end result, when you see how it comes out, and it really is worth it. But, that is an issue. It's something to think about because it's not for everyone. It isn't. But for those who can do it, and it's an incredible experience. It truly is. I wouldn't do anything else.
Yes, all of that. And, I think the flip side of the resources issue, I think what I often say is the hardest part of my job is saying no, because there's so much unmet legal need in New Jersey. And I'm sure in Pennsylvania and other places, right? There's just so many people who are turned away. And so we get thousands of requests for help a year. Most of them don't really involve issues we deal with, and we try to refer them out. But oftentimes we know that they're just not going to find someone else to help them, and they've been wronged. And really, as John mentioned earlier, like they deserve more. And so that can be really hard. And then carrying the weight. I mean, when COVID first hit and we were working on getting immigrants out of detention and people out of jails and prisons, it felt like we were the only ones doing this work, and it can be really overwhelming and time consuming. And so I think the kinds of practices Michelle talked about as far as like being collaborative and supporting, when you're looking at organizations, I think you really want to get an understanding of the dynamics and how well employees work together, and how well they're supported, and how seriously they take into account people's well-being and professional development and all of that, because I think that's a signifier about the they have to be, organizations, you want them to be doing the external work, but also the internal work of supporting the team.
I agree with everyone else when they said one of the hardest parts is the burnout, the emotional component. The one thing I would add on to that, and I think this may be true of other organizations too, is that clients don't always appreciate you. We are typically dealing with clients who are at the lowest point in their lives, or they've been in such a low point for so long that's become their new normal. And so you can do a fantastic job for them, and they will yell and want to yell, curse, and scream at you anyway. And I think that's hard for people to get used to. There's an amount of that you need to tolerate, and there's an amount that you shouldn't. And it's hard to know where that line is, depending on the client's own characteristics. Because with a mentally ill client, you probably need to cut them some more slack, right? But if it's someone who just is spouting off on you because they feel like they get picked on all day, and they want someone that they can finally pick on just to feel a little better about themselves, that's not really okay. So I think it's hard to have that double whammy of being empathetic towards someone, but also having to guard yourself a bit if they're really rude about the help you're giving them. Especially my newer employees, because I've been the manager for about 2.5 years, and we have a big spread in terms of amount of time people have worked here. We have people who have been here for 30 years, people who have been here for 10 or 15, and I've had 3 people since we've been expanding who have been here only for about 1 to 2 years. And when they start, they don't all overtly say this to me, but I see it like in their reactions, like, I won and they came out and they yelled at me. And it's like, yeah, some people aren't grateful even if you do a great job for them, but you can't calibrate how you treat the population you serve based on how they treat you. Because at least in my experience dealing with government caseworkers in various ways, that's how you develop contempt for the people you're supposed to be helping. And that's something I encourage everyone to guard against. Because I used to see it when I worked for the government, and I see it now when I deal with food stamps or Medicaid or unemployment cases. The people they're supposed to be serving very often, they don't even pretend to tolerate. And you don't want to become like that. So you got to be aware that they might not treat you great.
This might be a little bit of a spring because I didn't send you guys this question, but that kind of makes me think. I have a lot of family in the medical industry, and oftentimes they tell doctors and nurses don't get too attached to your clients. Do you agree with that, or do you have a different perspective on that as public interest attorneys? What is like a proper amount of I guess emotional emotional investment to bring in new client relationships?
That's a good question. I think it's a tough one to answer. In this type of work, as many of us have said, you're dealing with people that have incredible problems and at a very emotional point. And because of that, it can often make it hard not to get emotionally invested with them. But at the same time, you have to maintain, you're not their friend, you're not their counselor in like a mental health sense, you're their lawyer. And so you have to maintain enough detachment to be able to give them good legal advice and representation. In our work, it's particularly hard. It takes usually like 5 to 10 years if we are able to achieve an exoneration, and our folks are all in prison, so they have difficulty communicating with us. So you're probably going to be talking to mom or dad or brother, at some point. You're going to be walking the walk with this person for a decade or more. So this is something we really struggle with, because you do get to know people on a much deeper level, I think, the longer you're with them. But at the same time, you still have to maintain some detachment. You can't be their go-to for every single life decision. And we find when our folks get out, that's hard. We're oftentimes, when they're incarcerated, one of the few people that can give them good advice. But when you're out on your own in the real world, it's like, do you buy groceries at Wegmans or Giant? Like, we get calls like that. And it's like, you now have to learn to, do these things by yourself. And we can't be that person for every decision. So I think that's a great question. And it's tough to figure it out in practice.
So our cases come up so quickly that we really have to build a trust relationship with our clients very, very quickly, right at the outset, because they have to speak to us about very intimate personal things and they have to be comfortable doing that. So you, by definition, start to connect with your client almost immediately. But there has to be a limit to that, because if you can't live it with them, because then you can't do your job, then you become too involved. And if it becomes too personal, you don't have the distance necessary to make objective decisions and to help your client reach their best goal. So it's a balance. It's a constant balance because we care incredibly deeply about our clients. Um, but if you get sucked in too much into that circumstance, into that emotion that they're living, then you just can't function effectively as their attorney. And it's really important when you walk into a courtroom that you are the attorney. You're not there in any other role. You have to put on the best possible case. So it's a delicate balance, and it's not just for the attorneys. Our paralegals have that as well, because they've connected with the client from the outset as well. But I agree with what was already said, because there's this element of, you can't fix someone's whole life. You can do what is within your purview to do, and that can be hugely beneficial, but you can't make everything else perfect either. And it's, people in these circumstances, people who come to organizations like ours, sometimes they have really complicated and overlapping problems. And we don't have a magic wand, but we can handle this situation in the best possible way for the client, and give them what they need, or put on their best possible case. And it's important to remember that, because we too get questions for seemingly unrelated things. How do I do this? How do I do that? Um, and it's not our role to take on that responsibility, and we can't do it even if we want to. It's just not an effective way of engaging with clients. It's important that at the end of the day, what we're doing is giving them the best possible representation, not the best possible friend.
I'm not sure I have anything to add. I mean, we do impact work, but I would say that everything Michelle said really, even though it's, her cases are faster and shorter, I think it all applies. And so I'll stop there.
I just have a little bit to share because I also agree with what was said so far. You can't be too much of like a quote unquote bleeding heart, because I think you will burn out. I know, like, we have people on my staff who are on one end of the spectrum, perhaps too invested, and they get kind of jokingly pulled back by other people who maybe could be a little more invested. But you have to use some of that, because in public interest, I feel like one of the best weapons we have in court, if assuming the judge, he or she likes you enough to let you do this, is you can make a compelling like equity justice argument. Like an easy example I can give you is, there's an eviction moratorium in New Jersey right now, as many of you are probably aware, for non-payment of rent. So what a lot of less savory landlords are doing is pretending a tenant's not a tenant. They're pretending they're squatters and they try to eject them, or they're pretending they're doing something besides not paying rent. And so 2 weeks ago, I had a case with a single dad of 6 children who the landlord was claiming wasn't a tenant, even though we had rent receipts from a rent app saying that he was a squatter there. And so I went on a bit of a little rant, and I said the argument was disingenuous they were making. He had paid them. We had 3 rent receipts we could access before this guy deleted the guy's account in the rent app. So we knew he paid him rent. The attorney, I don't think he believed what he was arguing. I think a lot of private attorneys right now are hurting for clients, since they will take cases they wouldn't take ordinarily. But I said, this disgusts me. This is a single father of 6 kids. He was a victim of domestic violence, and the restraining order gave him the house and the children. And then we have a landlord trying to throw him out in the middle of a pandemic. So I got on my soapbox for a little bit. It made me feel better, which is selfish, but I think it also helped with the judge a bit, because judges are people too. And I like to think that would resonate. The judge in particular who heard the case, I know he's a grandfather. Whenever I picture him, he seems like the kind of grandfather you would see on a park bench in the summer holding the ice cream cone for his little kid. Like, he's very just loving like that, he appears. And I think it enhances your argument in many of our cases to have that emotional, to have some understanding of the emotional element the client's experiencing.
Thank you so much. And just to pivot, because some students they have classes soon. So for the students who are here for understanding, the best ways to get into public interest either this summer or in the future, so what do you think helped you get to where you are today? And what are things that your organization would look for in summer interns or new and applying candidates at your organizations?
So I think one thing I would say on that topic is there are multiple different ways to get into public interest. So if you know right now that that's what you want to do and you can find an internship and then a job, great. If you're not sure or you don't end up finding a job in public interest initially and you have to go a different route, it's not the end of the road. I think you've heard all of us say we were in private practice at one point. I was there for over a decade and then made the transition. So it's possible to get to the goal in many different ways, and there's no one right path. I would say that what helped me a lot was networking. When I was in private practice, as others have said, I did a ton of pro bono. And I was in Philadelphia and was able to kind of get to know different legal services organizations and other partners at my firm who served on various boards. And when I was starting to make the switch, had those resources to draw on. And I think the networking component can start even when you're in law school, when you're doing things like this. I think this is great. I'm sure any of us would be happy if you wanted to know more about what we did for you to reach out. So I think really getting to know people and just hearing about what different organizations do and what might resonate with you versus not is really important. In terms of getting a public interest internship in law school, I think doing the META program at Rutgers, we just have folks email, us our resumes. We look at everything that comes in. So I would say that if you don't find a placement through a fair or the program or some kind of more organized structure, don't be afraid to just send in your resume and an email and a cover letter really explaining what you're interested in, because probably somebody's going to read it and it might pique their interest. So, don't be afraid to put yourself out there. I know it can be nerve-wracking, but I really think, especially now with the pandemic and internship classes being smaller and stuff like that, you're kind of going to have to pound the virtual pavement and not be afraid to reach out in multiple different ways to try to get an internship.
So I think the key to succeeding in practice as a public interest attorney is to find something that you truly care about. If you find something that really resonates with you, you're going to do a better job, you're going to have a bigger impact, and really it makes everything about this process work. When I was making the change from private practice into public interest, one of the things that I highlight on my resume, which I think is what made the difference, it was only volunteer work. It was pro bono work or even non-legal volunteer work. But to be able to demonstrate that there's a commitment to the issue or there's a commitment to working with underserved populations. And it doesn't have to be, well, how do you get experience when you're a student? No one's going to come in with all this experience. But it doesn't have to be a job. It could be volunteer work. It could be anything that shows that you care about the subject matter or the topic, because I really do think that that is the key to succeeding in that kind of position. Because if you don't care, it becomes really hard. It's much harder to really, do a great job for clients who may or may not be terribly appreciative, for judges who may or may not be terribly polite. Everything about it is better when you care. And organizations like mine, I look for that most of all. It's not necessarily about, how many memos have you written? Are you on law review? That stuff, sure, we look at it. But what really matters is if I see an indication in someone's background that this is an issue they genuinely care about as a person.
Agree. When I'm looking at resumes, I definitely am looking for all kinds of indicators for that. And so, it can be pro bono work, it can be organizing work, it can be, being part of your faith community and leading efforts there. And there's especially, you know, as public interest lawyers, we wear many hats. We're not just like memo writing and brief writing. And so we're looking for other skill sets, including, are you connecting with clients, or are you, you know, can you connect with clients? Can you organize a coalition meeting? Like there are all kinds of things, like, you know, other tasks that we want to hear about, what kinds of skills you have for that. It hasn't been mentioned yet, but I'll say for my own personal experience, my clinical work was very important to my career path. My internships and my clinical work. My first summer internship was actually at the ACLU of New Jersey, and so then I came back years later. And then my clinical work was just, it gave me, I could talk to people interviewing me about drafting complaints and discovery work and client interactions and very concrete things about lawyering. And I have to say that as someone who's now on the other side, when I hire, I look for that kind of experience because, you know, law school and lawyering are very different things. And so we want to see both of, or I want to, you know, my team wants to see both of that. And I know there was something else I wanted to cover, but I guess if I remember, I'll come back to it.
Like everybody said, I mean, intern, volunteer, do pro bono work. It doesn't have to be legal. That would be ideal. But even just working with the population that you want to help in a non-legal capacity, social work type work would show something. I mean, we get a lot of resumes now, and I can't help but think when we see resumes of very accomplished attorneys who have no public interest background, they just don't want to be unemployed. And I get that, but like, that's not someone you want to bring into your organization because you think in the back of your mind, are they going to leave as soon as the economy improves, right? So you want someone who's shown that they're interested in this area, even if it's just volunteer work that isn't legal. And like you, Ms. Lo Cicero, am I saying that correctly? As you just said, I interned at Legal Services in New Jersey, which is like the umbrella for legal services in the state back when I was the summer after my second year. So they had like my old email address. They reactivated for me when I started working here 10 years later. So that was kind of it was a cute thing to me too. So it's funny that you and I both had that experience.
All right, thank you so much. So just being mindful of the time, I recognize that we were scheduled to end at 1:30. So we have more questions that we could ask, but we wanted to open up the floor for the opportunity for participant questions. So if you would like to ask a question, could you please open the participants button and raise your hand, and I will call on you, and then you can unmute yourselves. But while we're waiting for those kind of questions, I will ask one more to facilitate, for time's sake. So what does your average day look like at your respective organizations? Are you mostly doing paperwork or writing briefs or interacting with clients?
I would say for me, there is no average day. I guess now in pandemic world, it's a little bit more, I'm on Zoom all day, but what I think is kind of fun about my job is, there were some days I'd be at a prison all day. Some days I'd be driving across the turnpike all day to get to court somewhere else. Sometimes I'm in trial. Sometimes I am spending 3 weeks mostly writing briefs or doing policy work. So, and sometimes I'm just spending a whole day answering mail, which are not my favorite days. But for us, there really is, I think because we're a small staff, so we kind of have to do a little bit of everything. There's a ton of variety, which I think is fun.
So my day is a combination of casework, policy, and then administrative obligations. But so if you'll indulge me, I'd like to talk about the average day in the life of one of our staff attorneys, because I think that's more applicable. On any given day, our staff attorneys are either in court litigating on behalf of clients or preparing to be in court litigating on behalf of our clients. They're meeting clients, they're doing prep work, they're dealing with their strategy, their trial outline, or they're actually in court at trial. We have either a staff attorney or a volunteer pro bono attorney in court Litigating almost every day. There's probably 1 or 2 days in any given month where I don't have someone in court. So it's a litigation focused practice. It's a trial focused practice because we do bench trials. So, you know, that's mostly what our staff attorneys do all day. There's very little brief writing, although there's a little bit of that. It is not something that we do every day. Legal research isn't something we do every day. We're mostly preparing for trial or at trial.
So staff attorneys in my office are very different because we are not in court that much. I was in court today for an oral argument, and that is, especially for me, because of now a lot of that's done by other lawyers, it's not something that happens often, maybe once or twice a year. But so we are writing a lot of briefs. We have a very active amicus practice at the New Jersey Supreme Court. And I think this year we filed at least 20 briefs there. And most of those are handled in-house, although we have some volunteer attorneys that work with us on those briefs. And then we have our impact litigation, and that can look very differently. So right now we have one that's an Oprah case, and that's like in Essex County Superior Court. We have a huge systemic case against the Department of Corrections that's been going on for years regarding its provision of educational services to young people who are in state prisons. And that's been going on like I think 2016 or something. And I was involved in a jail case that went on for a decade. So like we have some cases where it's like lots of discovery and lots of, just the litigation twists and turns. So so it can really vary depending on what's active on a lawyer's docket.
This used to be a lot more standardized before the pandemic because Camden County at least has like regularly scheduled court days for small claims, for special civil, for landlord tenant. All that's been kind of thrown out the window. So attorneys now will go a week or two without going to court. It's not uncommon. But I try to do a little bit of everything so I still know what's going on because I can't really effectively manage people if I don't try cases myself. So like last week I had a DV case and an employment hearing, and then I just had like a name change hearing yesterday. All this is being done via Zoom. So it does vary. Our office may work a little different from other offices in that we represent people based on merit. So everyone who calls us gets at least advice. But if they don't have any merit, like if there's a landlord tenant eviction complaint filed against them and there's no dispute they owe the money and they just don't have it, there's no legal wrangling that's going to save them there. So all we do is advise them. We don't go to court with them. So it is pretty common for us if we're representing someone to also do briefs or file motions because we see a legal and factual issue that's worth pushing. And so because of that, we also have like, I think a fairly high percentage of appellate work we do relative to our cases because we only take cases that we think have an issue worth fighting about. So I have 3 matters pending the appellate division now. Since I've only been at South Jersey Legal Services for a couple of years now, but since I've been here, we've had at least 1 case pending at the state Supreme Court. There's an attorney in my office named Olga Pomar, who some of you may know, because I think she lectured or spoke along with, I'm blanking on his name, Jill, but the man who wrote the book about evictions as a whole in the country, very well-regarded book, well-known speaker.
Matt Desmond.
Yes, Olga Pomar, she has chapters written in local books about her impact on housing. She goes to the US Supreme Court on occasion. So we really run the gamut from like fighting local slumlords to stuff that has, issues we have with current statutes or case law to macro level stuff, larger level stuff that people like Olga work on.
Thank you. And Haley and Dylan, I do see your hands, but really quick, first there was a question asked in the chat by Dean Friedman. Do you have any sense of how this summer will play out at your organizations for possible internships? If the sizes of batches of interns that you'll accept will be the same, or if you'll be able to work in person?
Who knows, I guess is the answer to that question. I anticipate that it's pretty likely, maybe at least 75% that it'll be another fully remote internship summer, although I could be pleasantly surprised if that's safe enough to change. But I think regardless, we will give people the option of, even if we're back in person, if people need to work fully remotely, that's worked well for us. So we'll give people that option. Our summer class actually was a little bigger last year than usual. It was around 20 to 25 law students and about 5 undergrads. So we actually found that we were able to accommodate more people working remotely, and we could interface much more easily between our Philadelphia and Pittsburgh offices. So I anticipate we'd probably be looking at a fairly large summer class again this coming year.
So we're expecting to hold steady at our normal number of interns at 2. So it's far smaller of a program. We are not certain, of course, right now if that'll be fully remote or in person. This past summer was fully remote, and we'll make a determination on that when we get closer to the time. But a lot of our cases are going forward via remote trials. We're also having some in-person trials as well. So, we're planning on maintaining our normal program, maintaining our normal work. We did have to, we have onboarded a staff attorney remotely. So I feel like, we can probably do this reasonably well. And there is opportunity to see cases, to see trials, because they are happening both remotely and very few, but a few in person. I'm actually going to be in court this Friday in person. I haven't been in quite some time. We've been doing it from our house for so long. But as far as whether the internship itself will be remote or live, we're just not sure at this time.
I'm feeling the same way as Neelam, which is to say, I think more likely than not will be remote. We had pretty good feedback about our remote this summer. We had 5 interns, and I think part of the fun of being an intern at our office is, just like osmosis and being around people. And so we did try to replicate that as much as possible with regular programming to, meet our comms team and meet our development team, and then, having supervisors and check-ins and stuff. And so I imagine that'll happen. And I will say that right now, because we're down a staff, the staff person who manages our interns, we are not hosting folks this spring. But the point I did want to make earlier is that if there's an organization that you really have your heart set on, a lot of times the summer's the most competitive time. And so if you have time to intern during the year, that's another great way to get in to an organization that you might be particularly interested in.
My office plans to take 1 or 2 interns again. I'm just the manager of the local Camden office, so there are 7 other offices. Every manager is happy to take an intern or 2. So it really depends on how much someone may want to drive. It's hard to say where everyone would live if you're spread out across the southern half of the state or not. We have gotten really comfortable, as far as I can tell, across the organization working remotely. And it doesn't seem like the courts are in a rush to reopen, for good reason, because numbers are spiking again. So the administration, I think, is very, very employee-centered when it comes to reopening. In that, if there's any threat to our health, we're not going back to the office. We're not going to risk anyone's health to assist clients, because we have found we can do that perfectly well remotely. I guess in theory that could change if the courts starts reopening, and then we have to balance that. But right now we haven't been forced to balance it at all. We can err entirely on employee health. So I think we're probably still going to be remote, like others have said.
All right, Haley, your hand was up first.
First, thank you all for sharing your time with us. It's been really informative and great panel. My question was, what do you think are the most important kind of soft skills for people who want to go into public interest work?
I'll go first if that's all right. I talk a lot, so I'll talk and then I'll stop. At least for our practice, I think the most important thing is being able to diplomatically extract information, tease information from people. because at least the cases we do, and I think also for the DV work that at least one other organization does, you don't always have the time to slowly build a relationship. You have to like hit the ground running and get them to talk about painful, difficult things quickly, because clients don't know which facts may be dispositive, which facts are unimportant. And you have to bulldoze through a lot of the stuff that they want to talk about sometimes, but you have to do it in a way that's not going to shut them down. And I don't know that there's a technical way to learn that. I think you learn it by experience, but that's something that I think everyone has to really skill up on when they start, because we just don't have the time often to develop the record and the rapport with clients that we would like because of when they bring the problems to us.
I agree completely with John's answer. And I would also just add that in addition, because all of that is absolutely true, but in addition, empathy, just empathy. You can't fake it. Clients know. And just treating people with respect, which is something that, just about everybody we've run across in our internship program has done, if not literally everyone. But those are just, you have to treat clients like regular people, as opposed to, someone who, as opposed to lesser because they need help.
And I'll jump in to say that the softer skills, in addition to with the clients, it's also with your colleagues. And so one of the things we're very sensitive to is like how your privilege is showing up, and how how aware are you of racial dynamics and other equity issues in the office and even with clients. And so that's something we'd be, as part of what we interview for as well.
I would say just real quick, I think the ability to take an unbiased look at a case and try to keep an open mind is particularly important in our work. People are often in the spot they're in because people rush to judgment about a situation. And so even if we ultimately determine the person might be guilty and we can't get involved, we owe that person an unbiased, open-minded, and diligent review before reaching any conclusion. So for us, that
All right, thank you. And Dylan, you get the last word here.
I know this might be more like a general question and you all might have different answers, but I was just wondering, with the pandemic in general for legal services, how funding has been and what you perceive it will be like for the future. Because I know, like, having worked in a legal service organization, sometimes it can be tenuous and the bottom could fall out. So I'm just curious about what you all foresee for the foreseeable future, whether that be like LSC or any other grants that you receive.
We've had surprisingly good luck with fundraising during the pandemic. We don't rely a lot on grants or foundation money or the government. So I think with Black Lives Matter and that kind of thing, that has sort of spawned some giving. Who knows how that'll play out long term. And at least for now, our federal government grants have not been affected. So, I mean, for us, it's fingers crossed.
So our grants have remained steady, and our funding is a combination of competitive grants and foundations and just private donations. And we've actually gotten a couple of additional grants that are specific for COVID. That's additional money for that. So that's been incredibly helpful. And I too have noticed, we've seen some of our regular donors become more generous, understanding the impact that COVID's having on the organization's finances, and also, I think, really on the clients. It's people who really just see how COVID could detrimentally affect a domestic violence survivor in a bad situation, or being more generous than usual. So I think we're pretty steady, actually, at least for the time being.
Same for us. We haven't seen any kind of drastic decline as a result of COVID. I guess there might be, like, we're a little cyclical. And so now that, depending on the Biden administration, might impact people's support for us, but that's going to be way down the road.
Our funding has also held steady. It's expanding. My understanding of history, because I was a kid when this last happened, is the last time legal services as a whole was really viewed skeptically was back in the 80s. It was seen as a kind of a political football. But since then, there's a lot of data now that shows if you spend money on legal services to prevent or at least address legal problems initially, it costs society less in terms of incarceration or benefits usage, homelessness. And there's a lot of good data at the state level too. So most of our funding at least comes from the state legislature, and we have bipartisan support to my knowledge. And even, even recently at the federal level, the LSC funding has been increasing every year the past 4 years. It has, I think it was initially proposed in 1 or 2 of those years to remain flat, but then we got a small increase. So all of that could, of course, change tomorrow, but data-driven decisions, because we've had data going back into like the 90s now, to my knowledge, show that spending money on the work that all of us do reduces costs down the line. So I think that's protected us more than people's opinions when they're not tied to data.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming. We appreciate your willingness to listen, and thank you speakers for willing to come and talk to us today. We really appreciate it.